I don't think it's fair to her to get into the details of that because she apologized.
Okay.
And I've forgiven her, right?
Kate Middleton just exposed a royal betrayal so shocking, it may have landed Meghan Markle in handcuffs. In a stunning twist behind palace walls, Kate has come forward with explosive claims that Meghan Markle illegally planted hidden recording devices inside royal residences. Allegedly done to fuel her private memoirs and media deals, these secret tools were discovered embedded in personal spaces, some dangerously close to the king's private quarters. According to insiders, the evidence is damning, and it's already in the hands of law enforcement. So how deep did the spying go? What exactly was recorded, and who helped her do it? The palace isn't just furious, it's preparing for war. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking details of what Kate found, the moment she decided to come forward, and why this may be the final nail in Meghan's royal coffin. What if the royal family's most turbulent chapter hadn't yet been written? What if behind the carefully choreographed smiles and curated photo ops lay a deception so invasive, so shocking, that it fractured one of the most sacred institutions in modern Britain? And what if the whistleblower wasn't an outsider, a journalist, or a security agent, but someone who once sat quietly on the inside, dignified, composed, and now cornered into breaking her silence? That someone is Catherine, Princess of Wales. And what she's just revealed has stunned the monarchy, paralyzed Buckingham Palace, and reportedly led to an international investigation. Her revelation? That Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, had allegedly been planting covert recording devices inside royal residences, including private quarters, with the intention of capturing raw, unfiltered conversations for her own use. This story isn't tabloid fodder. It's not a rehash of old family drama or sensationalized palace rumors. This is a security breach of the highest order, a betrayal cloaked in luxury, and an unfolding scandal that could shake the very legitimacy of Meghan and Harry's public narrative. In a shocking twist, the once graceful Duchess who spoke of mental health struggles, familial rejection, and racism inside the monarchy now finds herself at the center of what insiders are calling a coordinated act of espionage. Not merely gossip, but a matter now reportedly under legal scrutiny, possibly resulting in arrest. For months, there had been whispers in the royal halls. Conversations that seemed to mysteriously surface in the press, quotes that felt too precise, details too intricate to be chalked up to guesswork. Advisors initially suspected leaks from staff. Some even pointed fingers at rogue aides or disgruntled insiders. But as the frequency and accuracy of private disclosures grew more disturbing, suspicions climbed higher until the target was no longer staff, but family. What Kate uncovered, according to reports emerging from behind the palace gates, didn't come from mere intuition. It wasn't a hunch, nor was it a paranoid reaction to the royal split. It came from evidence, specific, verifiable, and now reportedly in the hands of legal authorities. The princess, known for her cautious diplomacy and refusal to speak ill of her in-laws publicly, allegedly reached a breaking point. According to a senior aide familiar with the internal investigations, Kate was presented with audio clips, covert recordings, some of which featured her own voice, taken from inside secure areas of Kensington and Buckingham Palace. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Someone had been listening. In the royal tradition, even the most explosive scandals are usually buried beneath layers of discretion. Affairs, betrayals, and even abdications have been wrapped in veils of vague press releases and carefully worded statements. But this was different. This wasn't a quiet scandal that could be handled with dignity and delay. This was, allegedly, a deliberate, calculated invasion of privacy. And worse, it was potentially criminal. The recordings were said to be found embedded in an encrypted app used by a contractor who had worked on Meghan's behalf during a previous visit to the UK. This discovery, made during a separate cybersecurity sweep for digital threats, led royal security to investigate further. They began tracing digital footprints, device pairings, and suspicious IP activity. What they found allegedly linked back to an American tech firm with ties to Meghan's media team. Several of the suspected devices were cleverly disguised, one reportedly fitted within a custom brooch worn by a visiting associate, another hidden in what looked like an innocent decorative wall fixture gifted to the palace. According to sources close to the palace, once Kate was shown the initial findings, she asked only one question. Has it been going on since the wedding? The implications were heavy. If these recordings had been collected over months, or even years, the security risks could be catastrophic. Not only would it mean that Meghan had access to some of the most intimate conversations in royal history, but it also raised questions about what she had done with that information. Was it used as leverage during interviews? Was it handed to ghostwriters for her memoir? Or was it shared with studios or executives working on streaming deals? Suddenly, the deeply personal anecdotes featured in Meghan and Harry's Netflix documentary, their Spotify podcast, and her public interviews seemed to gain a darker hue. Were they recollections or reproductions? Kate's decision to come forward, according to insiders, was not an easy one. She reportedly held multiple closed-door meetings with senior legal counsel and palace security before deciding to speak out. Not because she wanted revenge, but because, in her words, the monarchy must be safeguarded. For a woman who had long carried the burden of silence, even as the media dissected her body language and questioned her loyalty, this moment was defining. It was no longer about rivalry. It was about integrity. Let's rewind briefly. When Meghan Markle first entered the royal spotlight, the public was captivated. A biracial American actress, breaking centuries-old traditions, marrying a prince who had long been the media's favorite rogue. The fairy tale was irresistible. But over time, friction grew. Between family members, between aides, between nations. By 2020, the Sussexes were out. Not just out of the palace, but out of the country. And from that moment forward, the stories never stopped. Bombshell interviews, explosive documentaries, and memoirs that promised raw truth from inside the monarchy. But if those stories were fueled by illegal recordings, the entire foundation of Meghan and Harry's public campaign could be built on a breach of trust. That revelation alone is enough to ignite a constitutional conversation about privacy, institutional protection, and the limits of royal commentary. The immediate consequence? An internal crisis team was reportedly assembled within 24 hours of Kate's testimony. Security experts, legal advisors, and even representatives from British intelligence agencies have allegedly been briefed. Meghan's team has not officially responded, but legal experts say that, depending on the jurisdiction, such acts could constitute a felony in both the UK and the United States, especially if the recordings crossed international borders. And as for Meghan herself, insiders say she's gone silent. No Instagram statements, no public appearances, no carefully worded denials. Just a void, a silence that feels less like privacy and more like strategy. Her publicist's office has declined comment, citing ongoing legal concerns. But former staffers close to the Sussexes have started talking, and what they're saying only deepens the intrigue. One former aide who worked briefly on the couple's media launch claims she overheard conversations about capturing authenticity and getting unfiltered moments for storytelling. Another said Meghan was obsessed with the idea that the palace would never let her version come out unless she took control. These aren't smoking guns, yet, but they paint a picture. A picture of someone determined to chronicle her royal experience in her own terms, even if that meant crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed. And now, the monarchy stands at a crossroads. For Kate, the decision to expose the truth wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. She has always played by the rules, even when those rules asked her to endure public humiliation or personal heartache. But this wasn't just personal. It was institutional. It was about safety, trust, sovereignty. And so, she spoke. And with that act, the Princess of Wales may have just triggered the most consequential royal investigation since the days of Princess Diana. More than a tabloid headline, more than a family dispute, this is the beginning of a reckoning. A reckoning between power and privacy, truth and deception, loyalty and betrayal. The palace has promised transparency. The public is demanding answers. And as this investigation unfolds, one thing is clear. The era of silence is over. The rain fell quietly over the palace courtyard that morning, a persistent drizzle that blanketed London in the kind of damp gray stillness only the royals could find comforting. Inside the centuries-old stone walls of Buckingham Palace, however, that calm was an illusion. For weeks, something had been wrong. Not visibly. Not something anyone could easily put into words. But a tension, hung over the household like fog over the Thames. Staff whispered more softly than usual. Doors were checked twice. Conversations once held in lounges were now whispered only in corridors. The security team had noticed it first. A digital irregularity. An unexpected data spike on the palace's closed internet system. On paper, it seemed minor, a misfire of connected devices, perhaps an unrecognized Bluetooth signal. But when the anomaly repeated itself in various wings of the palace, some housing senior royals, the alarms were quietly triggered. It began with a scan. Not a formal investigation at first, just a quiet sweep of the public areas and staff corridors. Nothing serious, just a routine check, or so the story went. But then came the first shock. Hidden deep behind a row of books in a drawing room frequented by senior royals, an object resembling a miniature microphone was found embedded in what appeared to be part of the decorative shelving. Disguised beneath a thick layer of dust, it would have passed unnoticed for years. It wasn't a child's toy or a misplaced gadget. It was high-grade surveillance equipment. From that moment on, the palace ceased to operate as a family home and began functioning like a fortress under siege. The second device was found just days later, this time in a more private space, a soft cream-colored cushion on a settee used exclusively by Catherine during private engagements. The stitching had been tampered with. Inside, hidden with meticulous precision, was another listening device, this one smaller and encrypted. This wasn't something you could pick up in a local electronics store. It had the fingerprint of expertise and money. Royal Security contacted a discreet but elite counter-surveillance contractor. The firm, known only to those with intelligence-level clearance, specialized in the detection and deactivation of espionage-grade recording tools. They were granted access under strict conditions: no public records, no reports, and absolutely no media contact. Within 72 hours, 5 more devices were uncovered. One in the music room, another inside a decorative vase gifted to Queen Elizabeth II by a foreign diplomat, a third embedded within a crystal chandelier in the Long Gallery at Sandringham. The fourth, perhaps the most disturbing, was found inside a handmade toy box in the nursery area once used by Prince George and Princess Charlotte. The final device had been camouflaged within the frame of a landscape painting hanging directly across from the private dining table in Kensington Palace, a spot where only family dined, and where discussions about royal duty, personal grievances, and future plans were casually held over meals. By this point, the gravity of the situation had become impossible to ignore. This was not a mistake, nor a rogue staff member trying to make a quick buck. This was deliberate, organized, systematic, and chillingly effective. Every device was discreet, low frequency, and sophisticated enough to avoid triggering most commercial detection equipment. Whoever planted them knew how the palace worked, both logistically and psychologically. They were positioned in areas that ensured a full audio capture of private, unguarded moments, not formal meetings, but real-life interactions, the kind most vulnerable to personal revelation. It wasn't long before suspicion narrowed toward one particular period of time: Meghan Markle's last visit to the UK in 2022. Despite having stepped away from royal duties, Meghan had returned briefly with Harry to attend the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Though tensions had still been present, the couple had been granted limited access to various residences under controlled conditions. It was a courtesy extended out of respect for Queen Elizabeth and a desire to maintain some semblance of family unity. But according to insiders familiar with the investigation, that very visit is now considered the operational window during which most of the devices were likely installed. The palace's security records revealed that a number of third-party contractors were authorized to accompany Meghan's team for wardrobe, makeup, and personal styling. Unusual, but not unheard of. More unusual, however, was the report that a technology assistant, not formally affiliated with any royal media project, had access to restricted areas during those days. That assistant, a dual citizen of the US and Canada, had since returned to North America and was allegedly employed by a tech startup that specializes in audio-to-text transcription and AI analysis. The dots were starting to connect. Too many to ignore. While royal family members had historically avoided criminal entanglements at any cost, this case now threatened to move beyond palace walls. Forensic data from some of the recovered devices showed evidence of periodic uploads, encrypted packages sent to servers registered in multiple international locations. That data trail suggested two things. First, that the devices had been active for some time, and second, that the captured audio had likely already been sent offshore. That, according to multiple sources, is what finally drove Kate to act. For months, she had noticed subtle changes in her surroundings. At first, it was a nagging feeling, a statement she made privately showing up days later in a royal commentary column, or a casual discussion with a relative surfacing in social media posts by royal sympathizers aligned with Harry and Meghan. but she had no proof. And within the family, suspicion is a poison best left unspoken. Until she heard it. According to a trusted palace official, Catherine was played a clip. A short, seemingly innocuous audio file recorded months earlier during a conversation with her children about her own mother, Carol Middleton. Nothing damaging, nothing political, but undeniably private, and undeniably real. That was the moment she realized they were being watched. Not by paparazzi, not by distant relatives, but by someone who once walked their halls. She ordered silence, total lockdown on who had heard what and when. Only the king, Prince William, and the palace legal team were informed. Together, they agreed that an external, confidential legal review would be initiated. The concern wasn't merely reputational. This was now a national security concern. The royal family are not ordinary public figures. They are, in effect, protected individuals under UK constitutional law, and their private communications are shielded by multiple legal and ethical protections. The findings of the legal team were stark. Under both UK law and certain provisions of the US Wiretap Act, if Meghan Markle was found to have knowingly ordered or approved the planting of covert recording equipment, especially across international lines, she could be liable for criminal prosecution. The device's presence in royal residences considered secure zones only heightened the severity. One senior investigator working on the case told a media contact, under condition of anonymity, that this is the most egregious breach of private royal communications since World War II. The monarchy had survived wars, abdications, divorces, and scandals, but nothing quite like this. Perhaps most disturbing was the question no one wanted to answer. How much had already been leaked? How many of the deeply personal disclosures Meghan and Harry made in their media projects were supported, even shaped, by data obtained through these alleged recordings? Did Oprah know? Did Netflix? Did Spotify? Or worse, did Harry? As of now, there's no definitive public evidence that Prince Harry was aware of the devices. But insiders report that the mood between him and William has deteriorated even further in recent weeks. What once felt like a chilly diplomatic silence has now turned into cold steel. And Kate? She's withdrawn further from public view, not out of shame or weakness, but because the storm she's unleashed is far from over. Her testimony, her choice to reveal what she uncovered, may yet come at a cost, not just to the Sussex's reputation, but to the future of the entire institution. And still, more devices may be out there. More recordings. More data. The royal family had endured countless scandals over the years, from abdications to divorces, from leaked conversations to wayward relatives caught in compromising circumstances. But never before had Buckingham Palace faced a scandal that felt like an invisible siege, one that invaded its most sacred spaces, listening silently, gathering whispers meant only for trusted ears. The discovery of the hidden devices and the suggestion that Meghan Markle had a hand in planting them had set off not just a wave of alarm, but a full-blown constitutional crisis. As the sun set over the palace gardens in the days following the initial revelations, the mood inside grew increasingly brittle. Prince William, known for his restraint and devotion to duty, was the first to retreat into a private mode of operation. Meetings with senior aides were rescheduled at a moment's notice. Security teams began implementing stricter clearance protocols even for long-trusted members of staff. Internal communications, usually conducted through private royal devices, were shifted to encrypted satellite lines. The palace was no longer operating under normalcy. It had turned into a war room. Prince William's personal reaction, according to those close to him, was a mixture of fury and heartbreak. He had worked tirelessly for years to maintain a working relationship with his brother, despite their ideological and emotional differences. William had allowed Meghan access back into the royal fold, albeit briefly, during the Jubilee in the hope of presenting a united family front. But now, with every newly discovered detail, it became clear that what had been extended in trust may have been returned with betrayal. The implications stretched well beyond fraternal loyalty. William knew what was at stake. The monarchy's credibility rested on its discretion, its ability to safeguard private counsel and shield the family from undue outside influence. If this surveillance campaign had succeeded, if private conversations had truly been recorded, exported, and possibly monetized, then the entire framework of royal confidentiality had been compromised. Queen Camilla, never one to be silent when threats loomed, was reportedly livid. Though she had once been viewed by the public as a controversial figure, in recent years she had found her place within the royal machine and understood better than most the need for unity and silence in the face of internal crises. But this, she confided to her inner circle, was unforgivable. She was particularly incensed by the discovery that at least one device had been found in a room she used for personal medical appointments, a space where she had discussed her health, aging, and even her role within the family with her physician and confidants. The breach of such intimate space was, in Camilla's view, an act of war. And so the divisions inside the palace became more visible. A firm internal line was drawn. Those who believed this was a criminal act and must be treated as such, and those who feared that any public exposure would destroy the monarchy's already fragile global reputation. King Charles, burdened by health concerns and desperate to maintain control during the twilight years of his reign, initially leaned toward quiet resolution. He was a monarch who valued decorum over drama, stability over confrontation. But even he could not ignore the growing momentum behind the scenes. The palace legal team had already begun assembling documents. Every device had been cataloged and submitted for forensic analysis. Logs of movements and visitors during Meghan's 2022 visit were reconstructed minute by minute. Special access lists, security camera footage, and digital entry cards were pulled. While there was no official announcement, every palace insider knew that a comprehensive report was being prepared, one that would likely be used in discussions with both UK law enforcement and American authorities if the situation escalated. Outside the family's immediate circle, chaos rippled through the palace staff. Housekeepers who had once tidied private apartments now did so with security escorts. Groundskeepers, chefs, and aides-de-camp were suddenly questioned about past interactions with the Sussex team. There were whispered rumors that one of the tech consultants who had accompanied Meghan had been paid an unusually large retainer in the weeks following the Jubilee. Another member of the advance team had deleted their entire digital footprint shortly after returning to the United States. These weren't coincidences. They were evidence. And within this cloud of suspicion, a new question arose, one that chilled even the most seasoned royal advisors. Had Meghan acted alone? While Meghan's motives had always been speculated upon, her hunger for global relevance, her desire to control her narrative, her perceived grievances with royal life. This situation implied not just ambition, but orchestration. Installing surveillance devices required planning, expertise, access, and discretion. It wasn't the work of a frustrated former duchess, it was the mark of a deliberate operation, and few believed she had done it without help, which is where Prince Harry entered the crosshairs. Though no direct link had yet been made between Harry and the devices, the timing of certain media revelations now appeared suspicious. Statements made by Meghan and Harry in interviews following the Jubilee, particularly those concerning private royal discussions, mirrored topics known to have been discussed in secure areas. In one particularly disturbing example, a private exchange between William and Kate regarding their children's education was eerily echoed in a Netflix documentary voiceover by Meghan, who referenced the heaviness of tradition being forced upon children too young to choose. It was not public knowledge that William and Kate had been debating a change in school plans for Prince George, but it had been discussed quietly in their private quarters during the period of Meghan's visit. That coincidence now felt damning. If Harry had been aware of the surveillance, if he had even passively allowed it, it would destroy any hope of reconciliation with his brother or the wider institution. More than that, it could make him complicit in a crime with serious international ramifications. Behind closed doors, palace aides debated how to proceed. A public scandal of this magnitude could trigger a diplomatic standoff between the UK and the US, especially if American citizens had actively participated in surveillance within a foreign sovereign estate. MI5 had already been briefed. Discussions were being held with the Home Office about whether to treat the issue as espionage, domestic wiretapping, or an international cybercrime. All were possibilities. None would be easy. Meanwhile, public appearances by senior royals became noticeably subdued. Kate postponed 2 scheduled visits without explanation. William was seen, stone-faced, entering meetings but offering no public statements. King Charles issued a vague reference to trust and privacy during a speech at a charitable event, a comment many believe was a subtle nod to the unfolding drama. Yet, within the palace, Catherine remained the quiet force at the center of it all. She had broken the silence. She had sounded the alarm. And now, She was the person most responsible for guiding the monarchy through the aftermath. Multiple sources close to the princess described her not as shaken, but resolute. This was not a scandal she intended to weather with dignified silence. This was a battle she would see through. Her resolve hardened with every new revelation. She no longer viewed Meghan as a misguided relative seeking autonomy. She saw her as a threat, one that had invaded her home, her conversations, and her privacy. Catherine was prepared to testify if needed. She was prepared to stand in court, to detail the extent of the violation, to speak out not just for herself, but for her children and for the future of the crown. And still, amid all the internal fallout, the palace faced another looming danger, the inevitable moment when the story would leak to the press. News outlets had begun to sniff around. A tabloid in Australia published a speculative article hinting at a tech scandal involving the royal family. A US-based journalist with ties to the Sussexes tweeted cryptically about private recordings and truth bombs yet to come. Social media was rife with conspiracy theories, and royal watchers across the globe were preparing for the next major bombshell. The palace, for the moment, remained silent, but the dam was beginning to crack. The truth could not be buried forever. When it broke, when the world learned of the betrayal, the devices, the recordings, and the suspicion swirling around Meghan, it would not be a news story. It would be a reckoning. The idea that Meghan Markle, once hailed as the breath of fresh air the royal family desperately needed, might have orchestrated a covert surveillance operation inside Buckingham Palace seemed unimaginable to some. Yet, as details began to emerge with growing clarity and intensity, it became evident that this was no petty misunderstanding or accidental oversight. It was a calculated campaign. And the centerpiece of it all, the alleged recordings, the hidden tapes, was where the truth lay buried. The tapes, as they came to be referred to in hushed tones within palace corridors, had not yet surfaced in full. No one outside the inner royal circle had listened to them, but their very existence sent tremors through the monarchy. The palace's technical security team had managed to intercept a suspicious data transfer attempt days after Catherine's discovery. The data was fragmented but encrypted, and initial analysis suggested it had originated from within the royal network and was destined for a server located in California. What disturbed the experts wasn't just the destination, it was the content index. The metadata of the files revealed timestamps, dates, and folder names that aligned too closely with royal meetings, family gatherings, and personal briefings. Though the audio remained inaccessible due to the advanced encryption protocols, the implications were unmistakable. Someone had attempted to export private palace audio files that were never meant to exist in the first place. This revelation shifted the palace's internal approach. What had initially been treated as a domestic breach quickly escalated into a top-level intelligence operation. MI5 brought in specialists with backgrounds in counter-espionage and digital forensics. Scotland Yard's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit conducted quiet interviews with every member of staff who had come into contact with Meghan or her team. No stone was left unturned. The question that haunted everyone, however, was, why? What was Meghan's motive? To understand that, one had to trace the trajectory of her relationship with the royal family from the very beginning. When Meghan Markle first entered the royal spotlight, she was portrayed as a symbol of modernity and progress. Her mixed-race background, her acting career, her feminist advocacy, all seemed to promise a rejuvenation of the centuries-old monarchy. But the honeymoon period was short-lived. Cultural misunderstandings turned into press battles. Palace protocols clashed with her independent streak. And behind the scenes, sources say, Meghan felt increasingly sidelined and unheard. Some believed that her desire to control her own narrative evolved into something far more strategic. After stepping down from royal duties in 2020, Meghan and Prince Harry began laying the foundation for a powerful media presence. The tell-all interviews, the Netflix docuseries, the podcasts, they were not spontaneous endeavors but carefully curated steps in a broader communications campaign. If she had access to confidential palace recordings, that campaign would gain a devastating edge. Imagine the power of being able to selectively leak private royal conversations, moments of tension, moments of anger, moments of hypocrisy, accompanied by her own commentary and framing. Meghan could rewrite history. She could present herself not as the divisive figure the tabloids portrayed, but as the whistleblower who dared to reveal the truth about an outdated and discriminatory institution. But that hypothesis didn't answer everything. There was still the logistical question. How had the devices been planted? The palace security logs during the Jubilee week had been mostly uneventful. Meghan and Harry were granted access to several areas, but always under escort. However, it was discovered that during a brief tour of the Queen's private library, Meghan's tech assistant, presented as a media liaison, had been allowed to roam unaccompanied for just over 9 minutes. That window, investigators believed, was sufficient to place at least 2 discrete recording devices into the room's antique heating grates and lamp sockets. Other devices were believed to have been planted in guest bedrooms, hallways, and even in an unused corner of the royal chapel where private spiritual reflections were often held by senior royals. The hardware, according to early reports, was sophisticated, similar to what intelligence agencies use for non-invasive surveillance. It wasn't the kind of tech one purchased online or borrowed from a documentary crew. It was military grade. That added another layer of complexity. Who supplied the equipment? Some fingers pointed toward a private California-based security firm known to have worked with Meghan and Harry after their move to the U.S. The company, founded by a former intelligence operative, had reportedly secured multi-million-dollar contracts with various celebrities for high-end privacy protection services. But a leaked invoice stated just before the Jubilee revealed a suspicious line item labeled Remote Field Acquisition Tools. This invoice, sent to a Delaware shell company linked to Archwell's legal counsel, raised even more alarms. If the devices had been purchased through third-party proxies and installed under the guise of media support or security enhancements, it meant that Meghan, or at least someone acting on her behalf, had premeditated this plan months in advance. Inside the palace, the realization was devastating. And still, there was no confirmation that Harry knew. His behavior during the Jubilee had been unusually reserved. He kept to his wife's side, avoided engaging deeply with William or Charles, and skipped a number of public events. Some said he looked uncomfortable, others believed he was simply exhausted from the ongoing transatlantic pressures. But looking back through the lens of this unfolding scandal, palace officials began to ask whether Harry's reticence had been guilt or complicity. At this stage, a private task force assembled by the palace began compiling what they referred to as the dossier, a comprehensive document cataloging all suspicious behavior, digital footprints, access points, and financial records associated with Meghan's visit. The document, which spanned over 300 pages, detailed everything from unusual courier packages to untraceable Wi-Fi pings picked up by the palace's internal surveillance sweeps. And still, the tapes themselves remained locked. The encryption was layered with multiple fail-safes, suggesting that whoever planned the operation anticipated interference. Some of the files, experts warned, might be set to auto-delete if tampered with too aggressively. Others may only be accessible with a biometric key, possibly tied to Meghan herself. But one thing was certain, the content, if accessed, could destroy the monarchy. Yet Meghan's real motive may have gone beyond mere revenge or reputation management. Whispers within the British media community hinted at something more audacious, a potential documentary project based on the secret recordings. The working title, supposedly pitched quietly to streaming platforms in Los Angeles, was Inside the. Prince William had always been viewed as the composed, dutiful heir, the measured contrast to his younger brother's impassioned defiance. Raised from childhood with the knowledge that one day he would be king, he bore that weight with a careful balance of solemnity and pragmatism. But the events surrounding the alleged palace recordings, and the betrayal that appeared to have originated from his own blood, began to peel away that royal stoicism. What emerged in the aftermath was not a man simply navigating scandal, but a future monarch forced to issue a choice that would alter the royal family forever. In the earliest days of the investigation, William had chosen silence. It was a deliberate strategy, an attempt to give his brother the benefit of the doubt, and to maintain the optics of unity, no matter how strained. But as evidence accumulated and whispers turned into reports, his restraint frayed. Catherine had kept him informed of every technical development regarding the tapes, and when he finally read a redacted summary of the intercepted data, something within him shifted. For William, this wasn't merely a security breach. It wasn't just a violation of privacy or an embarrassing scandal. This was personal. The palace had been his home since birth. Its walls had witnessed his most painful moments, his mother's death, his father's remarriage, the growing tension between him and Harry. And now, those sacred spaces had been compromised, possibly at the hands of the very brother he once protected from bullies, from grief, from consequence. There was a moment. later recounted by a senior aide, when William stood alone in the blue drawing room, the very space where one of the alleged surveillance devices had been found. He was staring at a painting of Queen Victoria, a woman who had ruled with an iron resolve during turbulent times. And then he turned and said, almost under his breath, "You protect the crown, or you betray it. There's no middle path anymore." The tipping point came during a closed-door session with senior advisors, Charles, and a legal team retained specifically to handle potential criminal proceedings. The question on the table was whether to confront Harry directly or to allow the intelligence services to proceed with a full inquiry that could lead to public charges. The mood was tense. Even Charles hesitated, caught between his role as monarch and his instincts as a father. But William had no such confusion. When asked for his opinion, he spoke with a quiet intensity that stunned everyone in the room. "This isn't about personal forgiveness," he said. "It's about whether we allow the monarchy to be turned into a reality show." He went on to outline what became known internally as the ultimatum. It was simple but irrevocable. Either Harry publicly denounced the recordings, cooperated fully with investigators, and severed all formal ties to any production companies or associates involved in the scandal, or William would take steps to have his title stripped. The title of Duke of Sussex, his position in the line of succession, and his royal patronages would all be removed. Not symbolically. Legally. Permanently. Charles, ever the diplomat, asked for a brief recess. William left the room, fist clenched, eyes unreadable. He stood on the terrace overlooking the Buckingham Gardens, breathing heavily. Catherine joined him, her voice soft but resolute. "You're doing the right thing," she said, "even if it hurts." Later that evening, a message was sent through a secure channel to Montecito. It contained William's ultimatum, along with a detailed dossier of the findings to date. The response from Harry was not immediate. For 72 hours, there was silence. No calls. No emails. Not even a lawyer's letter. Behind closed doors, the palace prepared for the worst. Royal Communications drafted contingency statements. Legal teams debated the constitutional ramifications of removing a royal title. Meanwhile, press officers developed a strategy to frame the move not as an attack, but as a necessary act of preservation. The monarchy, they agreed, had survived war, abdication, and scandal. It could survive this, but only if it acted with strength. When Harry finally responded, the message came not from him directly but through his attorney. The tone was defensive, even confrontational. The statement denied any knowledge of recordings, asserted that Meghan had never planted devices, and accused the palace of engaging in a smear campaign designed to discredit them ahead of an undisclosed charitable initiative. The letter ended with a warning. Any attempt to strip Harry of his titles would be seen as an attack on personal liberty and expression, and would be met with a vigorous legal and public response. To William, it was confirmation that his brother was too far gone. What might have once been resolved with a heartfelt conversation or a quiet reprimand had now grown into a constitutional crisis. The next day, William ordered a confidential legal review of the letter's patent that had granted Harry his titles. He met with Lord Chamberlain and the Privy Council to discuss the mechanisms required to rescind royal honors. He also requested a private meeting with the Prime Minister to ensure the government would not stand in the way of such a decision. As this machinery moved forward, William also began speaking to other members of the royal family. The Queen Consort was sympathetic but cautious. Princess Anne was unwavering in her support, stating bluntly that the family had been lenient for too long. Even Prince Edward, normally the most reserved, agreed that inaction would only embolden further disrespect. Still, the emotional toll on William was heavy. Behind the formal meetings and polished statements was a man grieving the loss of a relationship that once defined his childhood. In quiet moments, he would retreat to his private study and listen to old recordings, birthday messages, holiday greetings, even playful banter between the two brothers from years past. One aide described walking in on him as he replayed a voicemail Harry had left after the birth of Princess Charlotte. William didn't speak. He just stared at the phone, eyes glassy. Yet grief did not soften his resolve. On the 10th day following the legal review, William issued a private memorandum to the Crown Office. The document outlined the formal request for a royal decree to initiate proceedings to revoke the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's titles. It included references to constitutional precedents, breaches of royal confidentiality, and damage to the institution's integrity. Word of the ultimatum began to leak within days. Palace insiders whispered to select journalists that serious steps were being taken behind the scenes. Tabloids speculated wildly. Was Harry about to be disowned? Would Meghan be banned from returning to the UK? Would their children lose any future royal entitlements? Public opinion, surprisingly, tilted in William's favor. While there remained a vocal minority who saw the Sussexes as victims, the majority of Britons, already weary of years of infighting, saw the alleged recordings as an unforgivable violation. Polls indicated that nearly 60% of respondents supported stripping the couple of their titles if the allegations proved true. As the media frenzy reached its peak, William made one final move that caught everyone off guard. He reached out, not to Harry, but to a private intermediary the brothers had once shared, a mutual friend from their Eton days, now a barrister in London. The message was personal, handwritten, and unfiltered. "I never wanted it to come to this," William wrote. "But if you've chosen to weaponize our lives, I can no longer protect you. The crown is not yours to damage." The letter was delivered by hand. Whether Harry read it or responded remains unclear. What is known is that days later, Harry canceled a scheduled appearance at a veterans' charity event. Meghan, meanwhile, was photographed leaving a legal office in Los Angeles with what appeared to be a briefing folder under her arm. Back in London, William convened one final meeting with Charles and the Privy Council. A vote was taken. The majority approved moving forward with a formal review of titles. William didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, stood, and walked out without saying a word. What remained was the fallout, the headlines, the speculation, the legal firestorm that was sure to follow. But none of it could alter the fact that a line had been drawn. A choice had been made. William, once the quiet bridge between tradition and modernity, had taken a decisive step towards safeguarding the monarchy. And in doing so, he had also closed the chapter on the brotherhood that had once captivated the world. For all her polished appearances and perfectly tailored coats, for all the times she smiled serenely at walkabouts and exchanged polite conversation with diplomats, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was not untouched by strain. The role she had embraced for over a decade demanded grace, strength, and constant vigilance. Yet behind palace doors, in the privacy of royal apartments few had ever seen, Catherine had begun to unravel. The weeks following William's ultimatum to Prince Harry were some of the most stressful the royal family had endured in recent memory. But while William carried the public burden of a looming constitutional crisis, it was Catherine who bore the emotional toll of a family war fought in whispers, headlines, and legal threats. She had always served as William's confidant, his emotional compass. Now, the weight of that responsibility was beginning to crush her. It began with sleepless nights. Catherine, never one to complain, started staying awake into the early hours, poring over briefings from the palace security team and trying to make sense of the technical jargon and the audio surveillance reports. The revelation that palace rooms had been bugged, places where her children played, where she and William had shared private conversations, cut her deeper than she let on. To outsiders, it was a political scandal. To her, it was a personal violation. In those early days, she would sit silently in the Kensington Palace library after everyone had gone to bed, replaying every family interaction, wondering which moments had been overheard, which expressions had been misinterpreted, and most painfully, who had betrayed them. At the heart of her anguish was a question she dared not ask aloud. Had Harry and Meghan, in their hunger for control of their own narrative, decided that privacy no longer applied to the very family that raised them? Catherine's relationship with Meghan had always been complicated. In the beginning, she'd made a genuine effort to welcome her sister-in-law into the fold. There were awkward family teas, strained introductions to royal protocol, and attempts to bridge their cultural differences. Catherine believed in perhaps naively, that kindness would be reciprocated, that if she led with empathy, Meghan would eventually feel secure. Instead, things deteriorated quickly. The fallout from the Sussexes' departure from royal life, the Oprah interview, the carefully curated Netflix documentary, all of it had driven a wedge between the two women that now felt unbridgeable. But while public discourse focused on the drama between the brothers, it was Catherine who had absorbed much of the behind-the-scenes tension, trying to hold the family together while her own mental health deteriorated. The breaking point came one Tuesday morning in March. William had left early for a series of meetings regarding legal options surrounding the title revocation. Catherine, left alone in the residence with only staff and her children's governess nearby, had attempted to follow her usual routine. She dressed in a cream blouse and a navy skirt, sat down with her morning briefings, and began reading. But then something in the documents triggered a reaction. It was a reference to one of the rooms where a listening device had allegedly been found, the nursery. That single detail pierced through her composure like a dagger. The idea that someone, anyone, might have listened in on private moments between her and her children was too much. She rose from her seat, walked to the hallway, and collapsed into a chair. For over an hour, she didn't move. A housekeeper later found her sitting motionless, eyes red and distant, clutching a child's stuffed toy she'd absent-mindedly taken from the playroom. She was helped to her feet and escorted back to her room. For the rest of the day, she remained indoors, refusing food, refusing calls, refusing to attend a scheduled charity meeting. When William returned that evening, he found her curled up under a blanket, staring blankly at the fireplace. He knelt beside her, took her hand, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." But she didn't respond. Over the following days, things worsened. Catherine began to withdraw. Her conversations were shorter, her smiles more forced. She missed a few low-profile engagements and avoided press altogether. When questions came from aides, her responses were muted. "I'm just tired. It's nothing. I'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. Her closest confidant, her sister Pippa, was summoned privately. When she arrived at Kensington Palace, she found Catherine pacing the room, agitated and distraught. The two women sat for hours, and what Pippa learned shocked her. Catherine confessed she no longer felt safe. Not in her home, not among her extended family, and certainly not in the public eye. She feared every glance, every overheard conversation, every silent staff member. "They've turned our lives into content," Catherine said, tears sliding down her cheek. What kind of mother can protect her children when her own family might be watching? That same night, Pippa convinced Catherine to speak with a counselor, someone unaffiliated with the palace, someone who could provide objective help. Catherine agreed, reluctantly. The first session took place off royal grounds, at a discreet location secured by private security. Catherine wore sunglasses and a scarf, desperate to avoid recognition. It was in that room, seated across from a woman who didn't bow, didn't curtsy, and didn't sugarcoat, that Catherine finally allowed herself to cry without restraint. She spoke of the pressure, the public scrutiny, the betrayal, and most of all, the fear. Fear that this war between brothers had become something darker. Fear that her children would grow up in a family fractured by obsession and vengeance. What emerged from those sessions wasn't a woman defeated. It was a woman determined to reclaim some measure of control. Catherine began to set boundaries. She reduced her public appearances temporarily, deferring several engagements to Princess and the Duchess of Edinburgh. She instructed staff to vet every visitor and monitor communication more closely. Most notably, she requested a digital sweep of her private devices, her phones, her tablets, even her security key fobs. The findings horrified her. While no direct evidence linked anything to the Sussexes, there were signs of suspicious digital pings near her residence, including one traced to a Los Angeles-based server owned by a media firm rumored to have ties to Meghan's inner circle. It wasn't enough to prove wrongdoing in a court of law, but it was enough for Catherine. Her instincts had been right. Someone had been watching. These revelations steeled her resolve. She began advising William more directly. During nightly briefings, she challenged assumptions, pressed legal advisors on timelines, and demanded full transparency on all future investigations. Her involvement, though informal, became crucial to shaping the palace's strategic response. But even as she regained a sense of agency, the toll on her emotional well-being lingered. Her relationship with William, though still strong, became strained under the weight of shared trauma. There were nights when they sat in silence, not out of anger, but because words had become insufficient. There were moments when they clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, adrift in a sea of scandal neither of them had sought. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Catherine stood on the balcony of Kensington Palace, looking out at the darkened skyline of London. William joined her quietly. "Do you think they ever cared?" she asked. "About what this would do to us?" William was silent for a moment before replying, "I don't know anymore." Then he wrapped his arms around her. For a moment, they were no longer heirs to a centuries-old institution. They were just a husband and wife, caught in the crossfire of betrayal. By the end of spring, Catherine returned to public duties, but those closest to her said she was never quite the same. She smiled when required, waved to crowds, and gave speeches with her usual eloquence. But there was a new edge to her, a coolness in her eyes, a distance in her voice. The woman who once believed in reconciliation had shifted. Now, she believed in defense. And while the world continued to speculate about the future of the monarchy, Catherine had made a silent vow to protect her family, even if it meant building walls instead of bridges. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace hides many secrets. Its gilded corridors and towering windows echo with the weight of history. Kings, queens, statesmen, and scandals long buried beneath layers of protocol. Yet, even in an institution where privacy was currency and discretion a religion, there were limits. And when those limits were crossed, it wasn't press leaks or scandalous interviews that shocked the crown. It was what was captured silently, in high definition, through the palace's own hidden surveillance network. The security team overseeing the royal residences is one of the most advanced in the world. Beneath the facade of centuries-old decor lies a labyrinth of encrypted data streams, facial recognition software, motion detectors, and infrared sensors. Installed incrementally over decades under various monarchs, the system was designed not just for protection, but for observation, subtle, constant, legal. Every corner of key rooms, every major hallway, was subject to passive, round-the-clock monitoring. In the aftermath of the discovery of the planted listening devices, an act that had already sent shockwaves through the royal family, the internal security review took on a new urgency. It was no longer just about finding the bugs. It was about figuring out how far the breach had gone and who had orchestrated it. It was during this process that a technician named Derek Langley, a cybersecurity contractor recently brought in from GCHQ, stumbled upon a set of files stored deep within the palace's internal network. They were mislabeled, archived under innocuous labels such as Inventory Audits 2021 and Maintenance Logs. But when he cross-checked file sizes and metadata, something didn't add up. Inside these folders were time-stamped video clips, hundreds of them. Silent footage, some grainy, some crystal clear. What made Derek pause wasn't just the volume. It was the camera angles. These weren't the standard entryway shots or corridor sweeps. These were intimate views, private rooms, secluded lounges, even parts of royal apartments not typically monitored at all. He immediately escalated the discovery to the palace's director of security, a stern former MI5 official named Clive Mardell. Within hours, a lockdown protocol was initiated. The footage was duplicated, encrypted, and transferred to a secure server under the joint supervision of Palace Intelligence and Scotland Yard's Special Inquiry Unit. No one, not even senior aides, was allowed access without direct authorization from King Charles or Prince William. Over the course of 3 days, a select task force reviewed nearly 100 hours of footage. What they found went beyond what anyone had anticipated. The most shocking segments featured individuals who had no official clearance or scheduled business in the palace during the times they were recorded. One such instance showed a known associate of Meghan Markle, a California-based PR strategist with ties to digital surveillance firms, casually walking through a staff hallway adjacent to the royal archives. The timestamp placed this visit during a period when the Sussexes were supposedly estranged from the rest of the family and residing in the United States. Another clip showed a brief but unsettling interaction. A member of the palace's external maintenance staff, who'd passed all background checks, discreetly handing what appeared to be a thumb drive to a royal household page. The transfer took place near a service elevator, out of view from most known cameras, but this one, an auxiliary feed hidden behind a lighting fixture, caught the exchange. But perhaps most devastating was the footage that implicated a figure no one had anticipated. Lady Helen Ward, a longtime aide to Queen Camilla and considered by many to be above reproach, was caught entering restricted offices late at night. These rooms contained sensitive communications, private letters, confidential advisories, and direct diplomatic cables. What disturbed the investigators was not just her unauthorized presence, but her actions. She was seen photographing documents, carefully refolding letters, and in one instance, inserting a small device, likely a signal repeater, beneath a writing desk. When confronted with this footage in a private meeting chaired by William, Lady Ward denied any wrongdoing. She claimed she had been documenting inconsistencies for internal record-keeping and suggested she had permission from an unnamed superior. But when pressed to name that superior, she faltered. Her security clearance was revoked within the hour. A secondary investigation into her communications began immediately. Early findings revealed encrypted email exchanges with an American domain known to be used by media outlets with Sussex affiliations. The implications of this were staggering. It now appeared that someone had orchestrated a clandestine information network inside the palace itself, one that not only funneled private material out of the royal household, but did so using operatives camouflaged as trusted staff. The Sussexes, whether directly or indirectly, had access to details that could only have been known through visual confirmation or insider leaks. Prince William, ever the composed statesman in public, was incandescent in private. During a closed-door session with the palace intelligence team, he reportedly pounded the table and asked, "How long have they been doing this? How many of our conversations, our vulnerabilities, have been cataloged for Netflix or PR campaigns?" Catherine, when briefed on the findings, responded not with anger but quiet resolution. She insisted that their children's living quarters be immediately swept and new, unbreakable firewalls installed across all digital communications. The footage, she noted, was both their curse and their weapon. What the surveillance videos had provided was undeniable evidence. Not rumor, not speculation, but cold, hard proof that there had been an infiltration, one that threatened not just the dignity of the monarchy but the personal safety of its members. William, Catherine, and the inner circle of loyalists agreed on one thing. This had to be contained, but it also had to be used. For months, the palace had been working behind the scenes to build a legal case that would justify the removal of royal titles from Harry and Meghan. What they had lacked until now was a smoking gun, something irrefutable. The surveillance footage changed everything. Over the following week, a special legal review board composed of constitutional scholars, cyber law experts, and top barristers was assembled in secret. Every minute of relevant footage was cataloged and cross-referenced with known travel dates, staff rosters, and communication logs. Patterns began to emerge, devices planted in rooms shortly before sensitive information leaked to the press. Unknown visitors arriving hours before embarrassing stories broke. Even visual evidence suggesting that key pieces of art had been photographed, possibly to facilitate insurance claims or foreign appraisals. In one particularly chilling discovery, a video showed what appeared to be a conversation between a palace staff member and an unidentified person via video call. The audio was muted, but lip-reading experts later determined that phrases like "Catherine's routine," "nursery layout," and "Harry wants this on record" were used. The date? 2 days before Meghan's camp filed a formal complaint about inappropriate surveillance within the palace, an accusation that now seemed like projection. The palace, careful not to leak anything before the full case was constructed, began quietly replacing staff members, revoking vendor contracts, and digitizing sensitive records to prevent further access. Catherine personally spearheaded a new protocol. Any future contractor or aide would undergo quarterly security audits, and a royal ethics committee would be created to vet all external engagements. By the time the public became aware that something seismic had occurred behind the palace gates, the operation was nearly complete. Tabloids buzzed with speculation. Paparazzi clustered outside key residences. Anonymous sources whispered of a second Megxit, this time initiated not by Harry and Meghan, but by the institution that once embraced them. And at the heart of this unfolding drama, in a locked vault beneath Buckingham Palace, sat a collection of surveillance drives, silent, damning, and waiting for their moment in court. As the royal family scrambled to contain the damage from the surveillance footage discovered within Buckingham Palace, another battlefront quietly erupted across the Atlantic. While the palatial halls in London echoed with whispered betrayals and late-night strategy sessions, executives in Hollywood found themselves in a dilemma of their own, one that revolved around a woman who had crossed the Atlantic years earlier with a prince by her side, only to become one of the most polarizing figures in modern media. Meghan Markle, once a supporting actress with a modest following, had now become an emblem of royal disruption. But it wasn't just her past grievances or future ambitions that captured attention. It was the trail of contracts, communications, and financial maneuvers that led investigators to believe her Hollywood dealings were far more complex and possibly more calculating than anyone had initially suspected. Long before her marriage to Prince Harry, Meghan had maintained a steady presence in the entertainment world. Suits gave her international exposure, but behind the scenes, she had always been developing relationships in the corridors of production powerhouses. Agents, producers, streaming executives, many of whom had been close contacts years before her royal transformation, re-emerged post-Megxit, ready to capitalize on her newfound global fame. However, as the palace intelligence team quietly collaborated with international law enforcement, they began tracing the threads of Meghan's Hollywood endeavors, uncovering a series of confidential agreements and side deals that raised red flags. One such discovery involved a series of non-disclosure agreements linked to a boutique media consulting firm in Los Angeles. The firm, ostensibly founded to assist celebrities and brand